Looking ahead, challenges and opportunities in the changing world. Welcome to Talking Economics, a podcast by the Center for Economic Research and Graduate Education, Economics Institute. In this episode, we speak with Vladimír Novák, a senior economist at the National Bank of Slovakia, where he focuses on structural analysis. Vladimír earned his PhD in economics from CERGE-EI in 2020 and previously held a postdoctoral position at Bocconi University in Milan. His research examines how individuals process information, how this influences decision-making, and its broader implications for economic policy. His paper on how inattention shapes our perception of the status quo has recently been published in American economic journal Microeconomics. Welcome, Vladimír.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, jumping right into your theoretical research, you've done some impressive work. You graduated from CERGE-EI just recently and went to Milan to Bocconi University to continue your research in information economics. Can you maybe tell us more about your work there?
Before we start, I have to emphasize the usual disclaimer that everything I say here today is my personal view and should not be attributed to any institution. Going back to your question, so after finishing a PhD at CERGE-EI, I went for postdoc to Bocconi, as you said, and I worked there with Eliana La Ferrara on research on aspirations. This work is, so we are still collaborating, so the work is not yet done. So hopefully in the future, when our paper will be published or available, I can tell you more about it. But it was a great opportunity. I had a glimpse into area of development economics, which I was not familiar so much before. And I have found multiple avenues how to apply my knowledge of behavioral and information economics in this area also.
Mm-hmm. So can you then tell us more about what you did here at CERGE-EI and the publication in the American Economic Journal?
Yes, sure. So in general, my research is focused on information economics and behavioral economics and applications of these two areas on political economy and now also applying these aspects to development economics. I have to say that I started with work on information economics even before I joined CERGE-EI, because during my undergraduate studies, I was an intern at Basque Center for Applied Mathematics, where I was doing a little bit more of the research on operational research, and I started to work on multi-armed bandits, what, for instance, in economics is more known as, for instance, strategic experimentation. So this was my starting point into information economics, and then when I joined the CERGE-EI, it was very natural for me to continue in this area, and I had the great opportunity to be supervised here by Filip Matejka and joining his work on rational inattention, which was back then in the early days, let's say, and I could start with that. And so basically my first two papers are more on strategic experimentation, one on job scheduling, the second one on how experimentation is influenced by risk aversion. And then third paper, which you mentioned, which is now in AIG Micro, is on belief polarization and how evaluation of the status quo can lead rationally inattentive people to become polarized and to disagree.
So this is quite a novel mechanism, right? That's why it was published. So can you tell us more about how it works? So what is the logic behind?
Yes, as you said, we introduced a new mechanism showing how the combination of inattention and personal status quo perception can lead to belief polarization and disagreement. We believe, and because it was published, also others agree that this mechanism is quite novel. So the mechanism key part is quite simple. Basically, when people have to have a binary choice between, for instance, keeping the current policy, the status quo policy, and implementing a new policy, which is uncertain, and the people's attention is limited, the choice of information structure is determined by the relative value of the status quo for the individual, which we show can subsequently lead to systematic opinion polarization even among rational people with a priori similar expectations about the impact of the new policy. So I can illustrate the mechanism on one very simple example. So imagine two farmers, let's say Will and Paul, and both of them will be affected by decision to adopt or reject a new, for instance, climate law, whose impact on their future farming is uncertain. So both farmers are, as I said, rational and attentive, meaning that they can seek any information they want before expressing support or opposition to this law. However, seeking information is costly because their attention is limited. So they must decide how to allocate it. So now suppose both farmers are willing to support this adoption of the climate law only if they expect it is likely to improve their business condition. In particular, let's assume also that Will or one of them is doing well under the current conditions and the other one is not so much doing well or is just doing poorly. So what information these farmers would want to obtain? This is quite simple because, okay, they have limited attention, so what they are seeking is the most instrumental information which can help them with their choice. So in this case, the one who is doing well is trying to basically learn, is this policy improve even my situation? And the one who is doing poorly would like to find out whether this new law will make his situation even worse.
So they don't care about the opposite. They don't care about whether the one who is doing well is not so concerned about the fact that it might worsen his situation.
So if I am trying to find whether this policy is going to be better than my current situation, if let's say the true outcome is worse, I will obtain some signal, and that's exactly the point. So these two farmers, they both these two farmers, if the true outcome of this new policy is somewhere in the middle, so let's say it's not one extreme or the another, but it's somewhere in the middle, they will get the opposite signals. Because one is asking, like, is this, I'm doing well, so is this even better? He will learn, no, it's not going to be better than your current situation. The other one is doing poorly. He is trying mostly to find out, is this going to be horrible? He will learn, oh no, it is actually going to improve your situation. But then they basically, because they obtain opposite signals, they will go to the opposite extremes. And this will even, what we are then showing, is that this will lead to this belief polarization, basically, because they are not actually learning about what exactly is the outcome, but just kind of the direction. Is the change going to be positive or negative, let's say?
So it's relative to their
exactly
initial situation.
So and this is one of the differences, that even though if they have a priori the same expectations from the new policy, the current situation or how they perceive the current situation is determining what they want to learn and how their beliefs will evolve. So this is exactly because usually when we say about we are discussing belief polarization, people are thinking about, let's say, some biases like confirmation bias, where you have a prior belief which is kind of, let's say, in some direction or like to some extreme, and then I'm seeking that information even more. In this case, I don't need to have this even at the very beginning. So it is not just about what I expect from the new policy, but we are trying to emphasize that it is really also important to take into account what I really believe about the current situation.
Mm-hmm. So it's about the understanding of the status quo situation. Is it about the belief of the current situation, or is it about the actual state? Because you said that one of the farmers is actually doing well and the other one is not doing not so well.
So this was a really very stylized example. What we are showing in the paper is much more complex, and you can then discuss whether their perception of the reality is the true one or not. What matters for the mechanism is basically what
is different.
That is different, and then it works.
Mm-hmm. And then where is the inattention?
So the inattention comes in the part that I cannot obtain all the information that I want, even though it is available. Inattention is leading me to find this like the most instrumental information, or let's say the most useful one for me for this choice. So for this choice, I know that I am either going to support the new policy or reject it. So I'm just trying to find out the binary information. Is it better? Is it worse? If it is worse, I'm going to reject the new policy. If it is better, I'm going to support it.
So it's about preference for simplicity and.
Yeah, you are going a little bit ahead. So because the paper consists from two parts: the theory part and the lab experiment. And
that was actually my next question. So can you tell us how you implemented it in the lab?
Yes. So just to wrap up the theory part, what I would like to emphasize there. So it's interesting that the polarization there is happening for these, let's say, medium states or medium realization of the outcome of the new policy, not the extreme ones. And what we leverage in the lab experiment is that so all this should be driven by the change in the status quo valuation. So that's our main treatment in the lab experiment. So in the lab experiment, we were interested whether actually the real people would behave accordant with our mechanism, and whether they would become consequently polarized. So we implemented this into the lab, and our main intervention was that we were changing their evaluations of the status quo, and we were interested to observe whether they would actually then seek different information as predicted by the model. Mm-hmm. Our results actually confirm that the people behave according to this mechanism. However, the magnitude of the polarization was not as large as we predicted.
And so what was the story that you had in the experiment? Like what did they...
So the experiment was very abstract, let's say. So there were basically two boxes in which were some balls with some values, and then they could choose some advisors, which were basically describing these information sources. So there are many parts in the mechanism, and if we wanted to really disentangle and understand whether it is this mechanism, we had to kind of use this stylized version in the lab.
What was the costs of the information they were acquiring in the lab? How did you model the costliness of the information?
So we made one difference in the lab experiment in the way that our purpose was not to basically test whether the people are rational and attentive. So we were not testing whether they behave exactly according to some information costs, but we were more like if this change in the status quo valuation would actually drive them to change the information sources they seek. So in the lab, we more relied on cognitive costs of the information sources. So it was more in the way how this information was presented. And we didn't want to really impose some particular information cost on them, because that would actually, it might little bit limit how attractive our results actually are. We wanted to show bigger point that we have on one hand the rational intensive model, but like the results that we show in the lab are maybe even more general, or that we have a model that describes this behavior, but it is not that the people necessarily have to be rational and intensive.
Mm-hmm. So you did perfect the theoretical model, experimentally tested it. What about empirical data? Polarization is everywhere, unfortunately, around us. So is there a way to look at this also empirically?
Yes. So in the paper, we are actually mentioning several empirical papers, which if you put together, they kind of indicate that our mechanism is out there in real life. But however, it is very complicated to test exactly the mechanism in the real life. What we are trying to emphasize to some extent is that if your goal is to mitigate the polarization, you need to understand what is the source of the polarization, which mechanism is causing it, whether it is really some behavioralistic, emotional biases and other reasons, or it is this one that we describe, the rational one. Most probably in reality, it is combination of those. But even to be able to disentangle and to understand which mechanism might be, for instance, in different situations, the leading ones, you would need to also collect at the same time the valuation of the current situation as well as people's expectations from the new policy. And this is not usual in most of the surveys. So this is something that, for instance, we want to do, and we also emphasize this to other empirical people, that if you are collecting surveys, you should then collect both things at the same time, and this might actually help you to understand what is the mechanism in your particular case leading to the polarization. Because the nice thing about this one is this mechanism that we describe is rational. So there is still something that you can actually do about it. Or then, if you understand, you can better shape the information, because you know what information the people are seeking based on their perception of the status quo. And one thing that I would like to emphasize is that the polarization that we show is kind of stronger than usually used maybe in the literature, and we call it polarization ex ante, because just based on the valuation of the status quo and the prior expectations from the new policy, we can actually predict what information the person is going to seek, in which direction, to what extreme the person is going to be polarized eventually. And why I said stronger is that we are showing that this is across the signals that can be realized. So it's not just that I'm seeking some information, and now for some particular signal that, for instance, I have turned on TV and I have seen one particular news, I started now to be polarized, but we are showing that basically you start to search for such information sources that then on average, what you can from these information sources obtain, you would get polarized.
Yes, and you also have a tendency probably to interpret the news you're seeing in the way that.
But we don't need that.
You don't need that.
So that still, even if you are rational and you interpret it correctly, the polarization will still occur. And then this, if you misinterpret it, this can even make the situation worse, of course.
Perfect. Speaking about empirics and how people actually behave, I think this is a nice lead to your current job in the Slovak National Bank, where you are working in the structural analysis section of the strategic initiatives department. So what are the links between your theoretical research and your current work?
As you said, so I'm in the structural analysis section. So let me first just briefly introduce what we are doing. So our goal is basically to analyze the structural relationships and long-term trends in the economy. So we also monitor the Slovak economic's convergence towards advanced economies, along with competitiveness and productivity. We identify economy's risk and vulnerabilities, and also the effects of global trends like population aging, technological change, and nowadays trade fragmentation. And we further also analyze additional dimensions of quality of life, such as social inclusion and population health, for instance. So this encompasses quite broad range from macro topics to micro topics. And for those interested, we also published our flagship publication, which is called Structural Challenges, where we usually, so if you are interested in these topics, you can find it on the website of the bank and read what we are doing. So going back to your question, so our aim is to uncover some underlying mechanisms that are maybe not so much discussed in public or not at the first instance. And there, for instance, the theory can provide us the crucial guidance on what might be some blind spots that we are missing, where to look on. And then also, so I'm trying to bring and influence the topics that we are studying and bring on the table my expertise in information and behavioral economics, which I believe are these days playing even a bigger role than it might have been a few years back.
Yes, I think Slovakia is quite, well, not only Slovakia, but the preference for status quo is quite strong. So your research seems to be quite relevant. Do you have a chance to actually influence and collect the data that you might need for your theoretical work?
Yes, so for instance, we work quite a lot with surveys of different types, as well as with administrative data. So that's basically ideal place where I can understand what is maybe different between reality from, let's say, administrative data, and what are the perceptions of the people. And some of the surveys we collect in-house, or we design them. So then exactly I'm trying to, for instance, to influence it in the way that we also collect the evaluations of the current policies, not only of the new ones, so that we can then understand what is happening and maybe propose how to inform about these new policies in such a way that the people would actually acquire those information in the correct way.
That sounds exciting, and you have some ability to change things, which is great. Slovakia is I'm Slovak, so I feel for the country. There is a number of challenges. Which are the main ones that you would highlight? Your publication has more than 100 pages, but if you should choose.
Yes, exactly. It's hard to choose one, because I could name several. We know that Slovakia's convergence with Western EU countries is stalling, and we have a key problem with accelerating productivity growth, for instance, and that we need to change our economic model towards more of one innovative-based one. And also, for instance, there are other things like huge brain drain, or we observe some poor health outcomes, that are a long-term major challenge and are reducing quality of life in Slovakia. Well, and we also see that, for instance, Slovakia's social inclusion score is deteriorating. And however, I would like to highlight that in addition to addressing the current situation of vulnerable groups, for instance, we should pay also maybe greater attention to topics like intergenerational mobility, because we see that, for instance, the socioeconomic background of the people is influencing how well they might do in their lives. And this is also one of the topics that we are nowadays trying to explore quite a lot. So last year in Structural Challenges, we published a special chapter on intergenerational mobility in education. This July, the new Structural Challenges should be published, and I hope that we will again bring some new results in other areas like income, wealth, and on intergenerational mobility, because this is an important topic also for ensuring, on one hand, long-term economic growth, but also it influences the social cohesion and how, for instance, if we want to implement some policies, how this will be, how this will translate actually in adopting that in real life, and etc. So this is, I believe, quite important to work also on topics that can us inform also more on social cohesion, etc.
Thank you. I think there is room for changes, and I'm glad that we have strong people working and devising policies and advising policymakers in this. Thank you, Vladimír, for being here with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you once again for having me here today.